Our expert, we are excited to have Leah Burton with us today. Leah is a member of Steptoe and Johnson's Collin County office. She serves as general counsel to property owners associations, single-family communities, master plan developments, condominiums, and cooperatives in all aspects of corporate governance. Leah strives to develop meaningful relationships with her clients, as well as to provide prompt service, healthy communication, competent and effective counsel, and ongoing education on topics of concern to community associations. Leah currently serves on the board of directors of the DFW chapter of Community Associations Institute, or otherwise known as CAI. She also serves as a member of the CAI National Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Task Force, College of Community Association Lawyers Law Planning Seminar Committee, and Texas Bar College, and is board certified in Property Owners Association law by the Texas Board of Legal Specialization. In addition to Texas, Leah is licensed to practice law in Florida, California, and Tennessee. Welcome, Leah. We're happy to have you with us today.
Thank you so much, Megan. I really appreciate the opportunity to be here. All right, so we're going to jump right on into our discussion about annual meetings and elections. I'm also going to, at the end of the presentation, give a little chat about political signs versus flags, because I know that that is a topic that has come up quite a bit during this time, given that we are with an election impending. But let's talk about meetings to begin with. And I know that we have some Florida board members and managers on the call. Just so you know, this presentation is geared towards Texas, although I am licensed actively in Florida, and I'm happy to direct you to the property code sections that you will need to review with your legal counsel on these topics. But we are going to be talking about some general topics that will apply to you as well. So please hang on, please stay on the presentation. All right, so our overview is we're going to talk about the references to the property code that dictate for both single family and condos your annual meetings and elections. Going to break it down for condos and HOAs. And when I say HOA, that I'm discussing single family communities and townhomes. Then I will give some tips, make some comments on how to operate those meetings to ensure success. And then again, the political sign versus the flag distinction that I will wrap up with. So for the law that applies when we're discussing elections and annual meetings for HOAs is going to be Chapter 209 of the Property Code, and for condominiums is going to be Chapter 82 of the Property Code. And as you can see, for single family, there are quite a few code sections in Chapter 209 that dictate the various topics for meetings and for elections. These topics discuss the notice requirements, recounts, which may be attempted following an election for an HOA for a single family community, ballots, who has a right to vote, quorum, voting methods, elections, and tabulation to and access to ballots. For condos, you'll see that there are far fewer statutes, but they are just as robust. And so the statutes in Chapter 82 are going to cover board and owner meetings from January 1, 2024, when the Texas Uniform Condominium Act took effect, and then following. And then we have sections on owner meetings, board and owner meetings for quorum, and then voting and proxies. For owner meetings for single family, so again, I'm going to distinguish between HOAs, which are single family and townhome for purposes of this presentation, and then I will discuss condos. So for owner meetings, what the statute requires is a notice that goes out at a minimum of 10 days before the meeting and then a maximum of 60 days. And when you are providing notice of that meeting, a lot of communities ask the question, well, can we send it by email? Can we send the notice by email? If we're going to be voting on a lot of items, do we really have to put all of those things in the mail and send them through the U.S. Postal Service? The answer is yes, you do have to send it by mail. That does not mean that you cannot also send the correspondence and the notice package by email, but it does need to go in the mail. There is an argument to be made that if owners have consented to receive all communications from the association by email, then technically you could send those documents by email, but still, our recommendation always is mail, mail, mail when it comes to those annual meetings. Other meetings are different, but when it comes to the annual meeting, you got to send it by mail. But again, you may also send it by email. Now, you can't just rely on the 1060 timeline as far as notice goes, because your governing documents might actually carry a different timeline. It might have, as here in the example on the slide, a minimum of 15 days, a maximum of 45 days. So our recommendation is always just kind of try to do the best of both worlds and make sure that you are aligning with both documents. So stay within both timelines from the statute and from the property code and from the governing documents. What I always do suggest, if it's possible for the board to amend the bylaws, just amend them so that your bylaw provisions align with what state law requires. A lot of older bylaws will have this like 1545 day or 30 and 60. They'll have all kinds of numbers. And just because you want to be as consistent as you can be with state law, just amend the bylaws if you can, so that you don't have to have this distinction. You don't have to hire a lawyer and pay the fees to get an interpretation of what kind of notice requirement you have for your community. So for HOAs that have more than 100 lots, you have to send out this additional document in advance of your election. You have to send out what is known as the solicitation of candidate form. That form has to go out 10 days, at least 10 days before you send out the ballots. And what that document will say is, here, if you want to submit to be a candidate up for the upcoming election, then here's how you tell us that you want to be a candidate. And you got to give those individuals 10 days to submit their names, their resume. You can ask for additional information, and you will give that notice by mail, by email, plus you post it on the website, and these are the options. So you don't have to do all three, or email plus posting it somewhere in the community that is in a conspicuous location that people, like a bulletin board at the community center. So a question that I often get asked is, okay, well, if we have to send out this solicitation form and we have a nominating committee requirement, then how does that all work out? This is where I would say the nominating committee requirement in your bylaws is outdated and archaic. And if you're going to amend your bylaws, I would just remove it, because honestly, at the end of the day, if you have a community that's more than 100 lots, you have to comply with this section of the property code, which states that if someone does submit their candidacy form to the HOA timely and in accordance with your directions, their name goes on the ballot. Period. So regardless of what the nominating committee does. So it's almost like the nominating committee, they can't say, oh, we're not going to put John Smith on the ballot. If John Smith submitted his candidacy form pursuant to the statute, John Smith gets to go on the ballot. So it's really, at the end of the day, really kind of archaic for a nominating committee to even exist. Again, if you have communities of less than 100 lots, that's a different story. You may want to entertain the option of a nominating committee if you have people who even want to serve. And as we all know, finding people to serve on any committee for an HOA, let alone the board, has proven to be more and more of a challenge as the years go on. As for methods of voting, this is a big topic, because when COVID came about and boards, HOAs could not hold meetings, they said, okay, well, how are we going to vote if we are not holding in-person meetings? And so electronic balloting, absentee balloting was already in place, but electronic balloting became a real thing, like a real option that was available to HOAs to get those votes without requiring in-person attendance at a meeting. And so what the statute authorizes is, and this is the statute, this is 209 plus the Business Organizations Code, in person or by proxy, plus absentee, plus electronic, and the HOA does not have to require or does not have to offer more than one method of voting, as long as you allow for either in person or by proxy. And for purposes of all of these different voting methods, In-person, absentee, and electronic ballots actually count as in-person attendance, and they also count towards quorum, which is really great because a lot of communities that have a challenge obtaining quorum are more likely to do so if they are offering electronic balloting as an option. So following COVID, when communities started offering these various methods of voting, it was very exciting. Everyone was getting the vote, but then the question came up, well, what if our bylaws don't actually authorize absentee and electronic balloting? To which our response was, oh, it's COVID. Like, what judge is going to say, oh, you can't have electronic ballots because it's not in compliance with the bylaws? Was it ever challenged? No, it wasn't ever challenged during COVID. But now that we're outside of that pandemic era, there is a question of, well, if the bylaws don't authorize it, then can we still do it? And a liberal approach to this topic in the past was, yeah, just go ahead and authorize it. I mean, the property code authorizes it. If the bylaws don't authorize it, well, you just amend the bylaws. But there were communities that said, well, we don't want to amend the bylaws, or we don't need to do it without an owner vote. And so that's a risk that you take if you proceed with those voting methods without having that authority, because a case came out, which I believe is on the next slide, Megan, that I'll just mention, it's called Rockwall Ranch Property Owners Association. And it came out of Austin and actually did say that if you want to use absentee or electronic voting, you got to amend your bylaws. So anyone who challenges an election that was done by electronic or absentee balloting without the authority in the bylaws, they can now rely on this case from just a couple years ago as support for their challenge. So there's really no reason to risk a challenge to an election. There are already enough issues that come out of elections with allegations of improper ballot tampering and improper voting. And so we don't need to add another challenge to the mix. So if your bylaws do not authorize electronic and absentee ballots, amend them if you can, and then do away with the issue. Next slide. All right, so for ballots, when it comes to ballots for HOAs, they've got to be in writing and they've got to be signed. And like I said, electronic ballots count as a ballot, so not all ballots are happening in person. You've got your out of meeting ballots, and then you've got your in-person ballots. There is the idea of secret balloting, which is something that is authorized by the property code, but it's got to be in the governing documents. So, and there are special provisions that apply just to secret balloting. You have to have procedures laid out. Very few HOAs actually have secret balloting provisions laid out by a resolution. And so while the concept of secret balloting is out there, it's not necessarily executed in compliance with the statute. And at the end of the day, if you don't have those procedures in place, then balloting isn't actually secret. And when I say secret balloting, I mean where the ballot that is submitted by the homeowner doesn't have the homeowner's name on it, meaning they haven't signed it, they haven't executed it, it's purely secret. And when you're submitting like an absentee ballot, there's no secrecy involved there. You've got your name on there, you've got it signed, it's got your address on it, so it isn't actually secret. What is secret is that people don't know how you voted one way or another when it comes to the voting, when it comes to the counting of those ballots. Okay, so switching over to condos for a sec. So for condos, you got to meet once a year at least. That's kind of the core requirement. You got to meet once a year. And you have to meet if homeowners come together by petition and request a meeting by petition that is signed by 20% of the membership. So this does happen, and I've had it happen a couple times in the last year where a condo community was not happy with something the board was doing. They rallied, they got a petition signed by 20% of the membership, and the board was then forced to hold a special meeting. These special meetings that are forced are oftentimes for the purposes of removing one or more of the board members. And so when you receive one of these petitions, it's really important to be thoughtful in the vetting of the petition, because sometimes there'll just be names thrown on there and you don't know if it's an owner, you don't know if it's a renter, and renters don't count for purposes of voting. So you have to make sure you vet all those signatures and make sure that those members actually did hit that threshold before you go scheduling any meeting. And that's when legal counsel can help with that. So owner meetings for condos have to be open to the owners, but interestingly, in the condo world, you don't have to give notice of, this is just for a slight caveat for board meetings for condos. You don't have to give notice of board meetings to the condo membership unless the governing documents require, or unless someone specifically asks you. So that's just crazy. The boards can have meetings without having to notify the membership, but for annual meetings for condos, you do have to notify the membership and they do have to be open to the members. You give notice. What is different from the Condo Act, from the property code sections for HOAs, is that the notice requirements are actually dictated by what's in the bylaws. So if the bylaws have a minimum of 5 days and a maximum of 80 days, you're going to go with what's in the governing documents. You're going to go with what's in the bylaws. If the bylaws do not contain a notice provision, then you're going to go with that same 10 to 60 day requirement that's in the business organizations code. Also, what is very heavily governing document driven are the provisions on the voting methods, solicitation of candidates, and tabulation of ballots. Now, for voting methods, again, when COVID happened and everyone started with the electronic voting and the virtual meetings, condos, just like HOAs, wanted to do the electronic balloting, wanted to do the absentee balloting that's really driven by Chapter 209 of the Property Code. And for condos, it's actually much more specific that if you do not have the authority in your bylaws to have electronic or absentee balloting as an option, then you really can't do it. It's got to be in your bylaws. Otherwise, you will be subject to a challenge by a homeowner. And like I said, there are enough challenges out there when it comes to these elections. There's really no reason to walk into more. And so just amend those bylaws if you can, to bring them up with current times and allow for those electronic options. For meetings, just as a summary point, HOAs driven by both statute, Chapter 209 of the Property Code, and the governing documents. Condos are more heavily driven by their governing documents, but you still do have to be aware that there are some provisions in Chapter 82 that are going to dictate. And when I say Chapter 82, again, I mean condos, communities that were created from January 1, 1994, moving forward. The condo communities that were created before that date are governed by Chapter 81 of the Property Code, which has far fewer provisions than Chapter 82, although there are some Chapter 82 provisions that do apply to Chapter 81 communities. But that is a topic for another day, going through the distinctions between those two Property Code sections, because there are many. For tips when it comes to meetings, and there are a lot of things to consider when you're dealing with running these meetings in the context of both the condo and the 209, the HOA context. And one is to stay on time. And start on time, wrap on time, and stay on task. You want to make sure that you are ticking through those agenda items, and regardless of outbursts that you will have from homeowners during those meetings, which those always happen, and they are always like, even though you will say at the beginning of the meeting, okay, well, we're going to have a homeowner forum at the end, so please hold your questions to the end. No one ever sticks to that. There are always people who are going to raise their hand in the middle of the meeting. And what you want to do for these meetings is set a tone of cordiality and politeness. And so you don't want to walk into those meetings already with like a chip on your shoulder saying, everybody better stay in line or else you're going to get kicked out of here. Because then the tone will automatically, people will get on the defensive right at the very beginning. So you want to just get in there and just say, okay, hey, this is how it's going to work. If you could please hold your questions to the end. And then I really like the idea of of encouraging new members to identify themselves and to welcome them. Because at the end of the day, you're trying to get people to come to these meetings. You want participation by the community. And so you want to make them feel welcome. And you want to also give a disclaimer that, hey, it's great that you're here this time, but we encourage you, even though this is just this meeting, to please come to other meetings, volunteer to be on committees. Please, your participation is very valuable and helps towards the success of the community and the fostering of community spirit. So you want to use those meetings as an opportunity to pitch community involvement to the membership. So you also want to thank your committees. You want to thank anyone who has a role in helping move the community forward. And so there's never a better time to do it than when you are at a membership meeting. Now, when there are issues that come up that you can see that you're kind of at a stalemate, what you want to do is just table the conversation and pick it up at a later time, because it is very possible to go down some rabbit holes during these meetings and they will throw everything off and the whole meeting will get sidelined. And so you want to know, and you'll know when you've reached a point with a conversation where you're not getting anywhere and things have become non-productive. And that's when you say, okay, you know what, we're going to go ahead and just table this discussion for now, and the board will consider it. We'll talk about it at a later time, or perhaps we'll bring it up at a later meeting, so that you'll know when to do that. Also, the recording. So people, even if you have a rule in place that says you cannot record a meeting, people are going to do it anyway, and there's not really a whole lot you can do to stop them. So you want to operate at all times as though you are being recorded. And I tell my boards, when you're up there in front of the community and you are running these meetings, owners can pick up on any type of toxicity in the air, any type of aggression one board member might feel towards another. Like, they can tell by your body language. People are very, very perceptive. And so you want to at all times just maintain that, you're a politician sitting up in a chamber of council, and you got to keep that poker face on at all times. And the worst thing that you could do is to get emotional and launch out and fight with a fellow board member or start fighting with a homeowner, because those meetings go downhill very, very fast. Next slide, Megan. So as I mentioned, you want to be firm, you want to be polite, and during the portions where the board is making comments or the management is giving a report on the community and everything, the great things that the community's done over the past year, and someone, again, launches into a hand up or they just blurt out commentary or questions or demands, you again will just politely say, you're going to have your chance to talk at the end of the meeting. So if you could please just hold your questions until the end. And you have to keep saying that. And sometimes it gets to a point where someone becomes belligerent and you have to kick them out of the meeting. And I hate to have that happen, but it happens all the time. And so sometimes I'm the one who acts as the heavy at the meeting. I'm the one kicking out the person, or sometimes it's an off-duty police officer who's in attendance. And this really happens more at those owner meetings where there is an issue on the table that has really sparked the interest of the community. It's a hot topic. Emotions are high. Leasing or special assessment. Those are the types of meetings where at any time an owner is being requested to vote on one of those topics, things tend to get kind of hot and heavy. And so if you're going to be voting on something like that at your annual meeting, just keep in mind that sometimes owners are going to get upset. They're going to have emotions, and you want to make sure that you, again, stay calm and contained and push it towards the end of the meeting. The problem with having owners start asking their questions during the middle of the meeting is, like I said, it can sidetrack the whole agenda, and you want to make sure that you get the business done before people start talking, because then at least you've gotten through your agenda, and then the homeowner forum will happen at the end, and then each person will have their 3 minutes. And then you can say, okay, well, I think that, that's enough questions. We are coming up on our, on the hour or however long you have set aside for the meeting. And we're going to go ahead and get a motion to adjourn. And then you get in, you get out, and then if you have to table conversations again, you just can do that for a later time. When you have homeowners at these meetings, and I'm talking about if it's a board meeting or at an annual meeting when the board is making any kind of statement, if owners during that homeowner forum are direct conversation, questions, statements to the board should not feel as though they have to, that on the spot, make a statement or respond to an owner question. A lot of these comments that come at you from a homeowner or homeowners actually require some discussion amongst yourselves and sometimes with legal counsel. And so the last thing you want to do, again, picture yourself being recorded, is launch into a discussion about a topic that you already were not comfortable discussing, and giving into that pressure that you're feeling because you've got the eyes of the community on you. You don't have to answer anything at that meeting. You can take your time and be thoughtful about response. When scheduling these meetings, again, you want to stick to the agenda. And so planning ahead and keeping a very tight agenda is always a very good idea. Knowing how you're going to operate as far as communications for voting is also a good idea. So you want to have your deadlines for receipt of proxies. Are you going to allow proxies to be provided at the meeting, or is there a deadline for a proxy the 5 o'clock on the day before the meeting? In my view is you want as many proxies as you can get. And so if you're going to set a deadline of 5 p.m. the day before the meeting, what I encourage boards to do is on that proxy say, if you're not going to be able to attend the meeting, make sure we receive your proxy by this date, by this time. Otherwise, come and bring it to the meeting, just so homeowners know if they're mailing in a proxy, that don't assume it's being delivered. Make sure you're ensuring delivery if you want that vote to be counted. And if you can't get it to the homeowners association by the deadline, bring it to the proxy or give it someone to bring on your behalf. Over communicating, I'm all for transparency and over communication when it comes to voting, because homeowners, they have the option and the opportunity to vote, and you want to make sure that they have as much time, as much of an opportunity to give you their vote as you possibly are able to give in compliance with the statute and state law. So I am not opposed to offering absentee, proxies, in-person, electronic, the more the merrier, as long as the community and management feel that they can manage all those various voting methods. Because of course, the more voting methods you provide, the more organization you have to have in collecting those ballots, collecting those proxies, vetting those proxies and those ballots, so that on the day of the meeting, you're organized, you're ready to go. You've got that master registration list that has a document of everyone who has already voted. That way, if they show up in person, you can say, oh, well, I see that you have already submitted a proxy. Here you are in person. We're going to go ahead and cross your proxy off the list since you are now here in person. You want to make sure that everything is very organized so that you are not subject to challenge later on after an election. The one good thing about doing all electronic balloting is it's all calculated by an outside source. And all you've got is you've got your paper, it's got the voting results, the number of voters, yeses, nos, and the outcome of the election. And then you can walk into that meeting and you've got your data. The great thing about it is that you are not going to be subject to challenge because a computer is doing the calculations as opposed to you as a homeowner, as a tabulator homeowner in that meeting. And it eliminates that oh, well, there have been shenanigans that went on in the voting. Oh, I saw so-and-so pocket a couple of proxies. Oh, my proxies didn't get counted. And so by having that electronic printout, it's all done for you. You don't have to worry about that. The downside, of course, to doing that is that there are some people who are not going to get to vote if they didn't meet the deadline for the electronic balloting. So even if you've got that spreadsheet, I still like, if you're going to have an in-person meeting that is in person and in person, not just virtually, to also offer that in-person balloting option, just so that you can collect even more ballots. So as far as counting the ballots, I've had a lot of communities where day of at the annual meeting, the election, it just gets crazy because communities, those communities that want to do everything in person, the candidates are trying to stand over the tabulators, or they're accusing a tabulator of being friends with this candidate, or they think that, again, they saw someone pocket a couple of proxies and things are not being done fairly. So when if you're going to have an in-person election with ballots and with counting that right there, you want to make sure that whoever is tabulating those ballots, that they have zero affiliation with any of the candidates in any way, shape, or form. And the way that I like to do this is you find individuals from the audience and you say, hey, we need some vote tabulators. And then you just raise of hands. Okay, you. Do you have any affiliation with any of the candidates? No. Okay, come on up. And then you have those individuals count. And you keep the candidates and all the candidates' friends far, far away from the counting of the ballots, because you want your tabulators to not feel that pressure and to be able to count the ballots thoughtfully without people screaming in their ears. It happens all the time. There's all the screaming, there's all the chaos of the election. And so you want to try to keep emotions at bay. And the best way to do that is keep your tabulators and keep your candidates far away from each other. There are sometimes candidates who will say, oh, but I have a right. I have a right to have someone in my camp oversee the tabulating of the ballots. And that is only if it is a secret election. That statute they're relying on is in the secret ballot statute. If your community does not have all those secret ballot procedures laid out, that doesn't apply. And in most cases, it doesn't. So if they say that, no, you're wrong. And this is why oftentimes I attend these annual meetings, because I find that a lot of my communities, a lot of my boards, a lot of management, it oftentimes comes down to a legal question that they need legal assistance with. Sometimes a candidate will bring their own lawyer, and I will get a call from the community saying that this candidate's lawyer is here and they're telling us we're doing it wrong, or they're telling us that their candidate gets to oversee the tabulation, or I, as the lawyer, can oversee the tabulation. No. I don't like to see my boards and my managers get bullied into succumbing to the pressure in the heat of the moment in an election. And so that is why having your legal counsel present is sometimes a very good idea if you're going to be having the in-person counting. You also want to be prepared to offer a breakdown. Some communities will say, oh, well, so-and-so won, so-and-so lost. And then everyone says, well, how many ballots? What was the breakdown? And some communities will say, well, we don't have to tell you that. No, you don't, but it's a good idea to do it. While you don't have to give access to the ballots, you really should be able to provide a breakdown of how many candidates got how many votes. I don't like to discuss the number of votes each candidate got, because I think it really perpetuates that like mean girl, mean boy type of community, not spirit, but it's actually negative. I don't like it to be shouted from the rooftops. Oh, guess who? So-and-so only got 2 votes. I mean, it's mean, and I don't like it, but I am in favor of offering a breakdown in the sense of the numbers. Like, the candidates, we had candidates, the 2 winning, the first in place candidates got this percentage of the vote, this percentage of the vote. You don't have to get so granular as to provide information on people who may not have gotten any ballots or gotten any votes. When you announce the winners, and in the past, the community has given the vote totals, continue on with that. Otherwise, like I said, I don't like giving the names and the exact number of votes that candidates received, because I think it's mean. As far as dealing with contentious meetings, and I've already really kind of covered this topic, but read the room, feed the room. Feeding the room meaning, of course, if you've got people in there who are already upset, make sure that they understand that we are here to do this, to do business. You will have your opportunity to make your statement, and it's just imperative that you stay as calm as possible. And before blurting anything out, that you take that moment to pause, think about what you're going to say and then respond before you launch into a knee-jerk reaction comment. When you are asked questions, I really like this repeating of the question for the audience where you said, okay, this is what I think you said. Please confirm if my understanding of your question is not accurate, and allow them to clarify what the question is if you don't understand what it is. When you'll know, like I said earlier on, you'll know when it's time to adjourn. Once you've already answered the points, once you've already told the homeowners, okay, we will have to consider that and let you know at a different time, or the speakers are done, the agenda items and all the speakers that have been lined up for the meeting have concluded, then it is time to adjourn. Again, lawyer, you want to have the lawyer there if you're dealing with a contentious meeting. A parliamentarian is something that we're seeing more and more of, who is going to sit there and execute on Robert's Rules of Order. There are more and more of these individuals who are coming to meetings and really regulating meetings. And then, of course, law enforcement, as I mentioned, if you have a really contentious meeting, law enforcement is always a good idea to have, just for the comfort of knowing that if someone gets belligerent, that you can have them removed from the meeting. This comment here about the chair tap, sometimes I do serve as a regulator among my boards. When I see them starting to get emotional or starting to feel the pressure, sometimes I will do the chair tap, or I'll give them the motion to stop with the comment or to move on, just to help them and help support them as they navigate these contentious meetings. Also, having an exit plan. I can't tell you how many times I have been escorted back to my car after one of these meetings by the law enforcement officer who was in attendance at the meeting. And sometimes it does take that for your comfort when you have very, very upset homeowners at one of these meetings. And then this comment about doing the math, you want to make sure that the homeowners that have indicated a intention to speak up at the homeowner forum have been given their opportunity, because at the end of the day, a lot of these people, while they do have questions and concerns, a lot of times they're satisfied just by being given the opportunity to be heard and to feel like someone actually is receiving the information that they are providing and understanding and appreciating where they're coming from. So again, yes, satisfied owners isn't always the owner that's getting the answer that they want or getting a response to the question, but at least they have been given the opportunity to make their statement. As far as meetings that go off the rails quickly, just a few ways that that can happen very quickly. Pointing, standing up and pointing. That is known as a very aggressive move. If you point, things are going to go bad. Yelling, of course, cursing, all not good ideas. Name calling, assassinations of character. Unfortunately, this happens a lot of times in these meetings, which you would think that like we're all adults for the most part at these meetings. We should know that we're not to roll our eyes or to laugh at a homeowner when they stand up and make a statement, but it happens a lot. And so it's important to make sure that, again, calm and composed, no emotion, no yelling, no name calling, and everyone just stays on the straight and narrow and gets through the meeting. So that's meetings. And I'm just going to really quickly, because I know that we want to have some time for questions. I wanted to touch on this topic because it is so timely for right now. I have a lot of communities that are not understanding the distinction between political signs and flags. And so I want to let you know the different statutes that control these two topics, and hopefully as you move forward in your communities, have a game plan with how you're going to handle both of these topics as we move closer and closer to the election. So political signs are governed by section 259.002 of the Property Code. This applies to both condos and HOAs, single family townhomes. What the political sign statute says is that an HOA cannot adopt or enforce a restriction in their governing documents that says an owner cannot display a sign advertising a candidate or a measure for an election 90 days before the election and then 10 days after. So there's the 90-10 rule. What it is a candidate or a measure for an election. That is what a political sign is. A political sign that says anything other than I vote for so-and-so, or says vote yes or no on the bond coming up in the next election, those are not political signs. A sign that says Black Lives Matter is not a political sign. A sign that has a viewpoint on abortion is not a political sign. Unless these items reference a measure for an upcoming election, they do not constitute a political sign. The HOA can require the sign to be mounted in the ground and can limit the signs to one per candidate or measure. And then the HOA has some control over the materials that are used in the signs, construction. You can control if there are profanities. If I've seen signs out there that say like F so-and-so, you can regulate that kind of sign because that has profanity in it. So there are certain things that you as an HOA can do as far as regulation, size-wise, construction-wise, can't be on common area, can't be on your neighbor's lawn. But as far as political sign allowance, you gotta allow political signs. Now, switching over to flags. Flags are governed by a separate section of the property code, 202012. Now, I know the writing, the font on here is very small. Don't feel like you have to squint to try to read what it says. I put this in here just for a reference point if you want to look at this presentation later and go and look at what the statute says. But what the statute says is that an HOA cannot tell a homeowner that they cannot fly the flag of the state of Texas, the flag of the state of the United States, or an official or replica flag of a military branch of the government. That's it. Those are the three allowed signs. You don't have to allow any other signs unless your governing documents allow for it. So there are those governing documents that allow for school spirit signs or for a sports team sign. If you are allowing for those signs, great, go for it. Just don't pick and choose which signs you're going to allow versus based on the viewpoint that's offered on the flag. The other thing that the HOA can do, though, is you can regulate the height of the size of the flag. You have to allow either a freestanding or a home-mounted flag, and you can regulate the lights used to illuminate the flag. So there are some things that the HOA can do, but what you cannot do is say someone cannot fly the flag of the United States, someone cannot fly a other flag that is authorized by the governing documents. Next slide. The point that I really want to drive home is that political signs and political flags are not the same thing. So the first thing you got to do, uniform enforcement. So if you're going to make someone remove a sign because it doesn't comply with the sign regulations in your governing documents, you've got to make everyone, regardless of what the viewpoint is on the sign, you got to make them remove their sign as well. So this happens all the time where neighbor will have a sign in their yard that is, I'll use the Black Lives Matter as an example. They've got a Black Lives Matter sign in their yard. Their neighbor has a school spirit sign in their yard. The governing documents say no signs are allowed. So you can't just send a letter to the Black Lives Matter owners to remove their Black Lives Matter sign because it's the Black Lives Matter sign is non-compliant, as is the school spirit sign. So you have to uniformly apply that policy as to everyone, regardless of what is on the sign. You've got to follow the rule to a T. A political flag is not a defined term. So there is no 90-10 rule that applies to a political flag. If you have someone who is flying a flag from their mast, flying, freely in the community, and it says, vote for Trump or vote for Harris, that is not bound by the 90-10 rule because there is no such thing as a political flag that is allowed by statute. It will be entirely regulated by your flag policy in your community. So again, if your flag policy, just like your sign policy, allows for every flag under the sun, then anyone can fly whatever flag they want. What you can't do is go and tell the Harris or the Trump flag person owner to take down their flag because the majority of the homeowners don't agree with that political or don't want that candidate. You got to uniformly enforce as to all. I included a few hypotheticals here to help kind of drive home the point. Because here in Texas, we've got our 90-10 rule. Again, you can have the flag up 90 days before the election, and it's got to be taken down 10 days after. So in our first hypothetical, we've got an August 7th date, which is within the 90 days. An owner starts flying a Trump or a Harris flag on a flagpole in their front yard. Flag policy only allows for those 3 required flags that I mentioned. That flag has to come down. Even though it's within the 90 days before the election, because it violates the flag policy, not the political sign policy. If there is no flag policy at all, that owner gets to keep that flag regardless of the candidate that is on it. If you've got someone on August 1st, so now we're outside the 90 days, and they put up a Trump or Harris flag on their flagpole in their front yard, that sign. So again, sign. This is a sign, not a flag. That sign violates the statute because it was put up more than 90 days before the election. If there's no sign policy, owner gets to keep the sign. And then finally, August 7th, going back to signs again, but now we are within the 90 days. An owner puts a Trump or Harris flag on their yard, that sign stays because it is within the 90 days of the election. But then after the election happens, 10 days after, they have to remove the sign. If your governing documents don't allow for signs, it doesn't matter. The statute trumps in this case. You got to let them keep the sign. And with that, I will conclude and open it up to questions.
Yes, we've got a couple questions. The first one, which happens a lot. What happens if we don't have a quorum at the meeting? Then what?
So if you don't have a quorum, so you got to look at what your bylaws say. So if you don't have a quorum and this is an election, then you can't have the election, and you can't have the election. You have to have a quorum. So look at your bylaws. If your bylaws say that the board serves until their successor is appointed, then that board stays in place. That current slate remains until you actually have an election. Look at your bylaws, see if you have an option in there. If you're not able to meet quorum, then you, like 2 weeks later, sometimes it'll say 2 weeks later, you can meet back and the quorum will be reduced by half, or just those in attendance will constitute a quorum. Take a look at those quorum requirements in advance of the meeting. If you are able to amend the bylaws and you know already that you never get a quorum because the quorum requirement is so high, take the time ahead of time to amend the bylaws to lower that quorum requirement so that you set yourself up for success and can actually proceed with the meeting.
Okay, great. The next question we have, do we have to let candidates oversee the ballot counting?
Like I said, candidates should not oversee the ballot counting. Candidates should stay far, far, far away. Even though they tend to want to loiter around the tabulators, they need to stay far away. Unless, as I mentioned, there are secret ballot measures in place that comply with the statute, in which case an owner or candidate only in that scenario can designate someone to kind of stand in the back and oversee the counting of the ballots, but they otherwise have zero access to those ballots. They don't get to see how anyone voted.
Okay, great. And then what happens if there's a tie? Then what?
So if there's a tie, and this does happen, Robert's Rules talks about flipping a coin. And no one likes that because it's like, wait, what? We're going to leave this entirely up to chance. But that is in the governing documents, the bylaws that I draft. It does come down to a coin cost. It does not have to be that way, though. What you can do is for the people that are in attendance at the meeting, you can have either, and this can go a couple of ways. You can either say, okay, well, we have a tie, and so we're going to renotice and start over again and have have a vote and just go through the motions all over again in order to break that tie. Or what ends up happening a lot of times is just the individuals in the room vote. If you've got 200 people in the room, that's one thing. If you've got 6, I wouldn't go that route, because then it's just the vote, the outcome will be dictated by way too few members of the community.
And then the final question, who can serve as a proxy?
This will, again, be dictated by your bylaws. So if the bylaws, and when I draft bylaws, I put that a bylaw can only be given to a member or the member's spouse, so that it eliminates the idea that you could just hire someone to go get to be your proxy and go door to door and harvest ballots and proxies. So you want to align with what's in your bylaws. If your bylaws do not talk about this topic, again, when you amend them, I would provide some clarity to that point. I also include in that proxy section in bylaws a requirement that a homeowner use only the form proxy that is provided by the board in advance of the election, so that you don't get people showing up with a napkin saying, oh, well, here's my proxy. Because if your bylaws don't say anything about it, then as long as it's signed and it contains all the required information, you might have to accept a napkin as a proxy. So I like to have in bylaws, this is the form that we're going to use. No other forms will be approved. And then on the actual proxy form, what I like to have is a designation, a line where you can say, this is my proxy. Or if no one is identified in this proxy, then whoever is the chairperson or the president at the start of the meeting will serve as my proxy.
Okay, excellent. Well, thank you so much, Leah. This was very informative and very
You're welcome.
timely. I know that a lot of boards are getting ready to have their annual meetings, and of course, we are in a political season.
Yes.
So we really, really appreciate you being here today.
Of course.
And we are recording this presentation, so it will be available on the Castle Group website within the next 24 hours. So thank everybody for being here, and we'll see you next month.
Thank you. Bye.